Hi everyone, my name is Rosa Danenberg. I'm a PhD student at KTH, Stockholm, Sweden, and affiliated with the Center for the Future of Places. So in this conference we're talking about the future of main streets, mainly about the long decline of small independent retail establishments, which is considered essential for neighborhood stability. I would like to take you to Stockholm and introduce you to the Stockholm case study where there is a rise of small-scale ethnic entrepreneurship. So in this presentation, I focus on the potential of main streets for inclusive economies, particularly ethnic entrepreneurship. And first I introduce you to Stockholm context, and after that I present to you the morphological main street study that I have done, which resulted in a paper that I co-wrote with Michael Mahaffey, Sergio Porta, and Petra Elmlund. So introducing you to Stockholm and Sweden. So Sweden has seen a steady increase of population, reaching 10 million inhabitants in 2017. Population has changed, mainly due to the influx of immigrants in the last couple of years particularly. And this table shows you the number of immigrants in Sweden in the last decade, with increasing number of migrants. Also, Stockholm has seen this growth of population, which is also expected to increase. And as you can see, Stockholm is built on islands and sort of organized by different city districts. If you consider where those immigrants in Stockholm are located, where they're living, those are particularly living in a number of neighborhoods, and comparing these two tables, they almost look identical, which indicates that there is a concentration of immigrants and employment. So the left table shows the percentage of foreign background, and the right table the number of, or the percentage of unemployment, which actually indicates there's quite increasing social and spatial segregation in Stockholm, particularly on the outskirts of the city. Those neighborhoods have been built during the 60s and the 70s, when Sweden laid out a million homes program, building 1 million homes in mainly modernist housing style, resulting in these kind of areas with very little streets and more sort of recreational. I mean, we all know it under like the Le Corbusier housing style. So just to clarify, this study is not on spatial relation between concentration of migrants and employment of main streets, but with this context of Stockholm, it kind of clearly underlines the urgency for economic inclusivity and the relevance to explore the spatiality of ethnic entrepreneurship. So looking at ethnic entrepreneurship in Stockholm, small-scale ethnic entrepreneurship is on the rise, with numbers of enterprises up to 50 employees. It shows that those with a foreign background counted for 13% in 2011 and rose to 15% in 2014. Obviously, as we've discussed both yesterday and today, that up to 50% is not particularly seen as a small business, but this table actually shows that 50% of those businesses are up to 9 employees, which count for a small enterprise. And there's a little higher share of those run by enterprises with a foreign background. So appearing on streets, migrant economies, this is not something new only to Stockholm, and it's interesting to see that there's a couple of research projects that have looked particularly at ethnic entrepreneurship on streets. One of them is Ordinary High Streets by Susie Hall. I think we tried to invite Susie also for this conference. So she did this study trying to see how global and local realities actually coexist on high streets. And Ordinary Streets was an ethnographic and visual exploration of the spaces, economies, and cultures of street, and engages with issues of immigration, adaptation, and urban multicultural. I thought it was interesting how she found representations of space in those small spaces, and also linking, for instance, like the local space of a street with a global map, trying to see where the origins are. And actually, she pointed out quite clearly that there is an increasing diversity on high streets. Also, Sharon Sukin from CUNY did a study called Global Cities, Local Streets, where she looked at 6 cities worldwide, Toronto, New York City, Amsterdam, Berlin, Shanghai, and Tokyo. And she found that small retail stores can provide an entry point into the economy for men and women who migrate with little capital or education. So I've started to be interested in where are those ethnic entrepreneurs located, how do their spaces look like, and what is sort of the pattern that we can see from like a morphological perspective. So I've explored the correlation between this morphological structure of main streets, also the evidence of entrepreneurial opportunity, and the economic productivity of migrant populations. So what are the spaces that provide this diversity of ethnic businesses, and is there anything that looks like opportunities to improve, or is there any sort of sign that it could also degrade entrepreneurial opportunities for these migrants? And I use for this plot-based urbanism as a concept, as that sort of links different kinds of scales and looks at the spatial conditions and the non-spatial dynamics that use these spaces. For this, I know we're talking here about main streets, and I think we have a sort of a converging idea about what is main streets. Still, I would like to present you a definition that I used to be clear. So main streets in Stockholm, I used a couple of sources and pointed it down to a broad range of retail, but also non-retail activities. Main streets have a relatively high mix of business types and scales, high percentage of smaller independent local business stores. It has an aspect of centrality, a strategic location for local impact and regional reach, and it serves this dual role, which I find interesting. It's both mobility and public space. Those streets in main streets in Stockholm are quite sort of the traffic arteries in the city. So socially, they're at the heart of the communities as a place for social interaction, and physically, there are also these transportation links. So where in Stockholm are those main streets located? This is a aerial picture of the southern part of Stockholm. On the left side, the inner city. On the right side, you see these modernist housing suburbs with large degrees of, or large shares of green spaces. I found this quote particularly illustrative. So the spatial structure of the city is important with respect to business premises. In many Western European countries, an enormous difference exists between post-war and pre-war neighborhoods. And particularly in those old neighborhoods, shops and other enterprises grew more or less spontaneously around daily markets and in several streets. And these premises are now being occupied by new users, including ethnic entrepreneurs. So that told me that I should better look for main streets in the inner city, as there's so few main streets in those residential neighborhoods. There are particularly no ethnic enclaves, and those suburbs in the retail centers in the suburbs just don't have enough density and sort of economic power to sustain these kind of main streets. So I've looked at the 3 inner city islands and picked out 3 main streets of relatively similar length. The northern districts have about 70,000 inhabitants, and the southern about 125,000. There's a number of workplaces, about 20,000. And if you look at the smaller sort of neighborhoods around the main streets, it's about 15,000 people that live there. Those are examples of 2 main streets. And so the length of the main street is about the same, has similar number of blocks. Some have a little bit more plots than others, and with plots I mean the legal property lines. And I did a door count to see how much sort of vitality this street has in terms of how many doors and possibilities to go in. And so there's a door every about 6 meters. It's for you to convert to feet. But then from this plot-based urbanism concept that looks at plots as these legal property lines, to me it wasn't sort of satisfying enough, since there is, it's actually about the premises and those which I call plates that have actually sort of more flexibility in the changes of the size of the spaces. So that's how I converted from plots to plates. And so I started to build my own data set on the sizes of the floor spaces or floor plates, like the ground floor spaces, which I did through a couple of different methods. I've taken maps and actually drew or actually sort of measured the size, but also went to see the shop if there was any sort of backspace or if they have like a basement. In some of the shops I've actually went into and to check. So this was a study of about 700 plates, and I looked at them in 2009 and in 2018. And some of them have actually been merged over time, so that results in a little bit more in 2018. And interestingly, 50% of those plates have actually changed in the last 10 years, which means there was another shop, another kind of use. And from all the plates that I have observed and all the sizes, I categorized them into 4 different categories: the small plates, medium, large, and extra large. And then you see that if you look at the light blue and the green, those are the small and medium spaces. I think that's what we're interested in when we talk about small scale retail. Yeah, so this is what I thought was interesting. Almost half of them have changed. So what does the change indicate, and where are they located is what I've tried to see with this study. For the category of business, I have looked at a number of different categories and actually started to draw my own categories. So I looked at retail and non-retail, and within the retail category I looked at product and service. And I looked at 2009 and 2018 with the use of Google Street View. So I went to all the shops basically by myself on the street to see how they look today, taking pictures, but also looked at Google Street View to see how they looked back then and what kind of use was there. And interestingly, but not surprisingly, food and drink services have gone up, and also the personal beauty services, which are nail and hair salons, tattoo shops, those kind of services. And not surprisingly, the retail product stores have decreased over time. Also, I indicated for each shop what kind of owner, what kind of entrepreneurship, what kind of owner did run the shop. So I looked at sole traders, local companies, chains, and also regional chains. And I looked at those 3 streets, but also all the streets in total, and then you see that the sole traders and family businesses have declined. And looking only at the migrant shops, 40% of all the migrant shops are sole traders. But interesting also, the regional chains have just exploded in the last 10 years, and 30% of the migrants are running a regional chain. And the migrant businesses, it is a tricky thing to see on Google Street View, obviously, what kind of shop this is and who is it running. So a small number of those I have sort of labeled as I don't know, but otherwise they're either ethnic themed or neutral companies. And then for every ground floor space, so I've looked at these sizes of the plates, I looked at the categories of the businesses, only the ones that have been growing, because I was interested in this 50% change over the last 10 years. The type of entrepreneurship, whether it was a migrant business or not, and then and those 2 years. So the results, I did run them in a statistical program to see if they are significant. And so what I found is that the sole traders, family and local companies, are more situated in those small and medium plates and then large and extra plates, which is, I think, quite evident, but it's interesting that it showed a statistical result. Those on food and drink services are mostly run by local companies and regional chains, and the personal beauty services are mostly run by sole traders. I'm going to run through this a little quick because I want to get to my conclusions. So the migrant businesses are more likely to be in those small plates, more run by sole traders and family businesses. Food and drink services, and also those personal beauty services. So there's quite Korean story there. So are main streets an opportunity for inclusive economy? So 1 out of 2 changed in the last 10 years, and through researching or analyzing that change in time, it was interesting to see that there was a significant relationship, and that small plates actually are changing more often. So in Stockholm, this creates opportunities for migrants that are in those smaller spaces and that are running those businesses that are on the rise, basically. But also I have a couple of critical questions for discussion, and I hope some of them have been addressed, and I hope that we get to discuss them more over the run of today. So if half of the businesses actually have changed, does that indicate that there is also sort of an alarming signal for businesses that fail? And obviously we shouldn't only have those small plates. I think the large plates, actually those, we talked about the target as maybe an anchor or maybe one shop within the street, those larger chains that actually attract these traffic flows of pedestrians. And so interestingly, there's this parallel trend of regional chains that start to show up. And I wonder if they sort of create competition on those small plates between these highly adaptable chains and the small local independent stores. Some of those chains are actually sort of fast food chains that are just open just 24/7. So obviously they do a much better job in terms of economy. But with those influx of retail chains, all the streets are going to look the same. Stockholm has this quite distinctive profile of each neighborhood, and I wonder if that's starting to disappear. But also those rise of chains might actually be in fact an opportunity for migrants, since it's known in Sweden at least that migrant entrepreneurs have a higher ambition to open a second shop and a third shop. So in that case it might also be another business opportunity for migrants on main streets. Thank you.